Hello, here is Taras Timo from Ukraine, and many of you have been asking me over the weekend how my family and myself are doing because you heard on the news about the hits of Lviv, the rocket strikes that fell on certain objects here in Lviv. That happened on Saturday. Obviously we were very scared because first it was like late afternoon, 4-5 o'clock. There was a first strike which hit a fuel base which is probably like 5 miles from our house. It was pretty far. We could see like black smoke from the far away. But what was really scary, a friend of my daughter, a teenage girl, reported that they actually saw her parents actually saw the rockets flying just over their house. It's a tall multi-story building, and the rockets that Russians are using, they are flying. These are cruise missiles, and they are flying not so high. Basically over a 9-story building. It was like probably 50 meters over the top of the building. So, and they can be seen with bare eyes. People were filming and photographing them. So this is quite scary, I have to admit, when you see these things flying. Personally, I didn't see, but then many people reported on the media small video clips with those rockets filmed and then falling on the fuel base. Then in half an hour there was another major strike, which was just like maybe 1.5 miles from our house. And when this explosion happened, there were 3 in a row. We could see this again, the smoke so close to our house. I actually thought it's like the next street from us, because the fire was very strong and the smoke was quite powerful. So it looked like it's a closer proximity. It was anyway quite close. There is a tank repair factory probably 2 miles from our house, and that's where the major hit was targeted. I think they missed. They missed the proper industrial facility, but hit in an industrial area. It seems no one was hurt, at least according to the recent reports, because this is not residential area and it was basically Saturday afternoon. And I think anyway this factory has been evacuated some weeks ago, so it was more psychological pressure, I think, on the part of Putin, because Saturday was the day when NATO had their major meeting in Poland, and President Biden visited Poland the same day. So it was like a kind of FU gesture to Biden and NATO from Putin. There were reports from our military that around 50 missiles were actually fired towards Lviv. All of them except for 7 were hit by our protection units. I do not know the proper word in English. The units that protect us from the aircrafts and cruise missiles. So it's a rather high percentage of hits on the part of Ukrainian military to shut down basically like 43 of 50 missiles. It's very good. And anyway, it was very scary in Lviv, and people started to move out of the city even more massively than before. The refugee crisis is increasing over day by day. I lost the count how many people have left country, because there are different mixed reports by the UN, by the EU, by Ukrainian government, but we are speaking about at least 3 million people who have already relocated to the EU through Poland and to some other countries. Mainly they settle in Poland, but also go as far as Portugal or Spain or France, Greece, Ireland, Great Britain. Many people are internally relocated in Ukraine. So people moved from large cities to the villages, or from eastern, southern cities to the west. So this crisis is really growing. And I will reflect on several points in this video connected with the refugee crisis, because often people ask, but what about the children of Donbass that have been killed over these 8 years? The conflict in Ukraine, the war, but maybe not so escalated war, started, as you all know, back in 2014. And over these 8 years that passed since that time, some 14,000 deaths were reported. Obviously, they are not the deaths of people in Donbass. They are deaths of people on both sides, civilians and military included. So it's not fair to say that 14,000 people were killed in Donbass by Ukrainian army, as we often hear from the trolls on the internet. It's not accurate number by any stretch. Actually, it's very hard to say how many people were killed, because in the initial stage of that fighting it was extremely chaotic, and people relocated from Donbass to the other parts of Ukraine, and sometimes those who actually fled the conflict zone were counted as dead, and so on. But kind of generally accepted number is 15,000 casualties altogether. And given the tactics of the Russian war as we see it today, it's probably the Russian side that is responsible for absolute majority of those deaths. And I'm not saying this simply because of political sympathies, but as we are seeing today, how Russia leads the war in absolutely peaceful cities, we can project this on what happened 8 years ago at much more modest scale, and see how this worked at that time. And also I'm going to make some other points in my next slides, which I think will be informative. This is something that does not get much coverage in the mainstream media. An interesting table or visualization I came across is this one about the number of missiles fired during the war in Syria and during the war in Ukraine. So in 5 years of the Syrian war, only about 100 missiles were used by Russians, basically, although sometimes it was kind of proxy Syrian army using those, but they were all of Russian making and operated by Russian military personnel. So 100 missiles in 5 years, and in Ukraine by now 1,100 missiles just in 1 month. Obviously, we have to account for the difference of the tactics in Syrian war, since the sky was not closed by any technical means. Russians deployed their aircrafts that were dropping bombs, so the bombarding of the cities and of military positions was the main tactic used, whereas in Ukraine this is also used, but at much smaller scale, because their aircrafts are shot down basically every day, couple of them, so they have to use this long range or middle range cruise missiles, and that's why they have used so many of them. The good news is as we see, those missiles are in very poor technical condition, and at least 40% of them miss the target completely, like explode in the air or fall somewhere in the forest or on the field. and a large percentage of those are shot down by Ukrainians. So not all of those, thanks God, hit their targets, because if they did, we would have already tens of thousands of people dead from those missiles. The refugee crisis, as I said, I often come across some drawings and pieces of art that are so telling and so impressive that I use them in my presentations. And in this case, I think this is uprooted house with child care in this house as a load and a memory, and also it's resembling a schoolboy who is going to school, because this is what we are facing too, a kind of educational, formational disaster, because children are relocated to other cities or other countries where they have no immediate access to education. There is a big problem with children that were about to graduate this year because they cannot properly pass their graduation exams and apply to the university. Whole educational system is broken down. I work in the university, so this is something I have to face as a university employee, but also as a father, because our older daughter was also going to apply to university this year, and she's preparing for this really difficult test for school graduation, and all that is mess now because nobody knows how it will be working and what to expect. So it's schools and universities are also in the focus of this conflict somehow differently than even if they are not immediately threatened by the war actions, the system of education is anyway suffering. Well, this image is also very impressive. Now back to the question about the children of Donbass and you know, how many Russian-speaking cities were destroyed since 2014 by the Ukrainian Nazis. I hope those of you who have watched my video, my previous video, already know there are no Nazis in Ukraine in any considerable proportion, not more than in any other country in the world, and certainly they are not neither in legislative power or juridical power or any kind of power in Ukraine. But regarding Donbass, this is a picture of basically taken like a month ago. This is actual Donetsk, the one of the centers of the so-called Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, and this is how it looks after 8 years of merciless shellings by the Nazis. It's completely peaceful city. Yeah, there were some hits years ago. Some of them did kill civilians. We still do not know whose rockets and shells were those, whether they came from Russian side or from Ukrainian side. Different things happened during the war, and yes, there were deaths of civilians, but the scale is nothing to compare to what is going on with the cities like Kharkiv or Chernihiv these days, not to mention Mariupol, that is just basically wiped out of the face of the earth completely after just 4 weeks of fighting. Another terrible thing that is reported from the areas that are taken over by Russian troops is that after the fighting is done and the actual troops advanced further, the FSB comes, the Russian security services, and they start kind of purge of Ukrainian activists. They arrest teachers, professors, priests, civilian activists, and another thing they do is they destroy historical monuments, museums, burn down the collections of some museums, sometimes on purpose, sometimes because of the fighting, but also they are burning down libraries, Ukrainian libraries. They confiscate books in Ukrainian language, speaking about Ukrainian history, Ukrainian culture, anything Ukrainian, and they simply dump them on the street and burn them down, or burn together with the building. And this is not just casualty of war. This is done on purpose, systematically, in many towns and villages. In northern Ukraine, in southern Ukraine, in eastern Ukraine, wherever they are able to get hold of those residential areas and have enough time to introduce their Russian order. Obviously, this picture is just a historical reminiscence to the Nazi Germany, but what we are seeing is precisely what I was trying to communicate in my previous video about denazification. That by denazification, Putin means getting rid of Ukrainian nation, not of Ukrainian Nazis. And what he's showing and his repressive apparatus is actually doing in Ukraine is the destruction of Ukrainian culture, history, and any mention of Ukraine as a separate nation. So this really amounts to a cultural genocide and physical genocide, because many civilians are killed behind the front lines. Those who are not of immediate threat to Russian soldiers. We are not speaking here about guerrilla fighters or anything, but just peaceful civilians that are arrested during the night, taken God knows where, and never seen by their relatives again. This is happening rather massively. So many casualties, so many victims like that are being reported. Also, there are reports of rapes, obviously, as in every war of this kind, torture, extrajudicial execution, I think this is the word. So the people are being executed without any court decision or anything remotely close to normal justice. To finish this video, I want to show you a small video clip of a spokesman from the Azov Regiment, which I spoke about in my last video, but this appeared just yesterday, and this is an address from the Azov Battalion, Azov Regiment, to the Western public, and it has English subtitles, so I hope you can listen to this man, what he's saying. He's actually speaking from Mariupol. He's one of the defenders of Mariupol, and one of those people who are now physically shielding with their bodies people of Mariupol, civilians who are stuck there in the basement under this heavy artillery shellings and bombs. And he's appealing to the world to understand what's going on in this conflict, to support Ukraine, and to have sympathy with the people of Ukraine, which most of you actually do show, and I appreciate very much all this support. People write to me every day how they help Ukrainian refugees in various countries, how they donate humanitarian aid to the needs of Ukrainian people. I absolutely understand that certainly my listeners, those who care about Ukraine and care about listening to these updates, absolutely understand this, but maybe you have friends who still thinks there are Nazis in Ukraine and people in Ukraine are about, I don't know, some kind of chauvinistic superiority or desire to destroy other nations or anything like that. Show this short, just 2-minute video to them and let them see the face of the man who is speaking. I think it's very telling. And also listen to what he has to say. Thank you very much.
Слава Україні! Я звертаюся до західних друзів та до тих росіян, що вміють думати. Ми воюємо з військовими злочинцями, які щодня вбивають сотні жителів України. Тими, хто вбив тисячі жінок і дітей у місті Маріуполь. Ми воюємо з тими, хто збив малазійський Боїнг, з тими, хто відібрав Крим та частину Донецької і Луганської області. Наші військові в червні 2014 року не дозволили окупувати Маріуполь. Це ті військові, які після обстрілу мікрорайону Східний в Маріуполі ціною своїх життів пішли в атаку, відкинувши ворожу артилерію, після чого мирних мешканців ніхто більше не обстрілював. Ви повинні розуміти, що таке Азов. Це чоловіки, які в своїй переважній більшості взяли в руки зброю, бо на нас напали росіяни. Знайте, що в лавах Азову воюють бійці з ампутованими ногами на протезах, з 4 пораненнями. Вони самі схожі на Маріуполь, обстріляний окупантами, але живий, сповнений любов'ю до свободи. Я прошу вас не плутати поняття патріотизму і нацизму. Патріотизм – це коли ти любиш свою матір більше, ніж сусідську. Це коли ти любиш свою землю більше за ту, що дає кращий врожай. Коли для тебе твій народ найкращий в світі. Коли ти захищаєш свою країну, а не нападаєш на інші. Наші військові ніколи не вторгались в Грузію, в Чечню, в Придністров'я, в Сирію. Ми ніколи не намагались захопити чужих земель. Але нам доводиться протистояти справжнім нацистам 21 століття. Не лише Путіну, визнайте, це не він пілотує літаки, що скидають бомби на лікарні. Не він артилерист, який руйнує житлові будинки, ховаючи людей живцем під завалами. Це робить російські солдати з мовчазної згоди всієї Росії. Згоди захоплювати, руйнувати, гвалтувати, вбивати. Мені б хотілося, щоб рано чи пізно всі ті хлопці, які зараз воюють за Україну, змогли сказати: «Привіт, батьки! Привіт, кохана! Як ви, діти? Тепер ви в повній безпеці, мої любі». І ці слова стануть правдою не лише за умови вашого усвідомлення, хто є ворогом, і вашої боротьби, аби не бути причетними до цього злочину.